First Contact and Prejudice. The Grand Assembly Hall of the Galactic Coalition buzzed with whispers and subtle movements of appendages, some chitinous, others crystalline, a few purely energetic. High Ambassador Tlara of the Verdant Nexus stood at the central podium, her bioluminescent patterns flickering with barely contained frustration as she addressed the gathered representatives. "They don't even have quantum communication," she stated, her translator conveying the mix of dismissal and concern in her harmonic tones. "Their fastest ships still rely on primitive fusion drives. And yet, here we stand, debating their admission to the coalition." The humans' representative, Dr. Sarah Chen, sat quietly in the observers' gallery. At 43, she'd spent the last 5 years leading Earth's diplomatic efforts, watching similar scenes play out across countless chambers. Her dark eyes remained steady, years of negotiations having taught her that sometimes silence spoke louder than words. The Mindweave Collective's representative, a shimmering cloud of neural energy, pulsed forward. "The humans have achieved spaceflight and demonstrated reasonable societal stability. According to our own protocols, they qualify for consideration." "Qualification is not the same as readiness," countered Ambassador Crix, his crystalline form refracting the chamber's light. "We've studied their history. War after war. Internal conflicts that nearly led to their own extinction. They still maintain nuclear arsenals, for void's sake." Dr. Chen's hand tightened almost imperceptibly on her datapad. The coalition had access to humanity's full history, both the triumphs and the tragedies. What they consistently failed to see was how those very struggles had shaped humanity's greatest strength, their ability to learn, adapt, and overcome. The debate might have continued indefinitely if not for the urgent message that flashed across every display in the chamber. The Sentinel Network, responsible for monitoring deep space threats, had detected something unprecedented. The Hraxian Empire, one of the most technologically advanced civilizations in the known galaxy, had gone silent. Not just quiet, silent. 40 billion beings, their quantum communication networks, their Dyson swarms, their planetary defense systems, all dead quiet in less than a standard cycle. The chamber erupted into chaos. The Hraxians were supposed to be untouchable. Their technology was centuries ahead of most coalition members. Their defensive systems were thought to be impenetrable. Order. The first speaker's voice cut through the pandemonium. "We must address this crisis immediately. All pending matters, including the human admission debate, are temporarily suspended." But Dr. Chen was already moving. She'd accessed the public data feeds, studying the readings from the Sentinel Network. While the coalition representatives argued about proper procedures and committee formations, she noticed something they'd missed, a pattern in the sensor readings that reminded her of something from Earth's history. She requested permission to speak, a bold move for an observer. The first speaker, perhaps too distracted by the crisis to maintain usual protocols, granted it. "Distinguished representatives," Chen began, her voice calm but firm. "The pattern of communication loss across the Hraxian systems matches something we've seen before, not in space, but in our oceans." The chamber fell silent, attention now fixed on the human delegate. "On Earth, before we developed electromagnetic communication, we used sound waves to communicate underwater. We discovered that certain natural phenomena could create dead zones, areas where sound waves would bend around a specific space, making it appear empty. We called them acoustic shadows." She pulled up the sensor data, highlighting the propagation pattern of the communication loss. The Hraxian systems didn't just go dark, they went dark in a specific pattern, like ripples in water. Whatever this is, it's not destroying their communication systems, it's bending spacetime around them, creating a cosmic shadow. The Mindweave Collective pulsed with sudden understanding. "A quantum shadow. Theoretically possible, but we've never." "Because you've never had to look for it," Chen finished. "Humanity spent centuries developing ways to detect things we couldn't see directly. When you can't rely on advanced technology, you learn to notice patterns, to think laterally. The first speaker's sensory appendages twitched with interest. You believe you can track this phenomenon? Better, Chen replied, allowing herself a small smile. I think we can predict where it's going next. And if we can do that, we might be able to stop it, Clara finished, her bioluminescence now pulsing with a different rhythm, one of grudging respect. The chamber fell silent again, but this time the silence carried a different weight. The coalition representatives looked at the human delegate with new eyes. Perhaps, they began to realize, there was more to these primitives than they had assumed. The first speaker's voice carried across the chamber. Dr. Chen, assemble your team. The coalition will provide whatever resources you need. As Chen left the chamber to begin her work, she could feel the shift in the atmosphere. Humanity hadn't earned the coalition's respect through advanced technology or military might, but through something far more fundamental, the ability to see patterns in chaos, to think differently, to offer hope when all seemed lost. It was just the beginning, but it was enough. The real test would come in the days ahead, as they raced to save not just the Hraxians, but potentially the entire galaxy, from a threat that no amount of advanced technology could detect. Sometimes, it took a primitive perspective to solve an advanced problem. The silent threat. The quantum analysis chamber aboard the Coalition flagship Eternal Light hummed with energy as holographic displays flickered with endless streams of data. Dr. Sarah Chen stood before the central projection, her sleeves rolled up, dark hair pulled back in a messy bun after 30 hours of continuous work. The room around her represented the pinnacle of Coalition technology, quantum computers that could process entire galaxies' worth of information in seconds, artificial intelligences that could model the collapse of stars. Yet none of them had been able to predict what happened next. We've lost contact with the Meridian Cluster, announced Captain ZY his crystalline form dimming with concern. 3 billion more lives, gone dark. Chen nodded, adding the new data to her model. The holographic display shifted, showing the spread of the quantum shadows across Coalition space. Each darkened point represented a civilization gone silent, their quantum communications networks rendered useless by something that shouldn't have been possible. Look at this, she said, gesturing to the newest data points. It's not random. The shadow isn't just moving, it's learning. The Coalition's top scientists, gathered from a dozen advanced species, exchanged worried glances. Learning meant intelligence. Intelligence meant purpose. Impossible, declared High Theorist V. Lara, her tentacles writhing with agitation. Quantum fields cannot exhibit adaptive behavior. The mathematics dash. The mathematics are based on our understanding, Chen interrupted, pulling up a new display. But what if we're thinking about this wrong? What if it's not about the quantum mechanics at all? She input a new series of commands, and the display transformed. Instead of showing quantum field disruptions, it now displayed something much simpler, a predation pattern. On Earth, we studied how predators hunt. The successful ones don't just chase, they learn. They adapt their strategies based on their prey's responses. This shadow, it's hunting. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Coalition species had evolved beyond traditional predator-prey relationships millennia ago. The concept was almost foreign to them now. But what could it want? Asked Captain ZYXTEL. These are entire civilizations it's isolating. Chen's expression hardened. Information. Or rather, the lack of it. Think about it, what happens to a civilization when you cut off all quantum communication? When you isolate them completely from the rest of the galaxy? They fall back on primitive communication methods, answered Dr. Rax, a being of pure energy, his form flickering with sudden understanding. Exactly, Chen confirmed. They're forced to use radio waves, light signals, anything they can. And when they do. She typed rapidly, pulling up historical data from Earth's SETI program. These civilizations aren't just going dark, they're lighting up like beacons in other parts of the electromagnetic spectrum. The shadow isn't destroying them, it's forcing them to reveal themselves. The implications hit the room like a physical force. Whatever this entity was, it wasn't just mindlessly consuming, it was methodically exposing advanced civilizations, making them vulnerable. "But why haven't we detected these emissions?" asked Vilara. "Because you weren't looking for them," Chen explained. "Coalition species abandoned primitive communication methods centuries ago. Your sensors are designed to detect quantum fluctuations, dark energy emissions, gravity waves, but not simple radio waves or light pulses." She pulled up another display, this one showing emissions from the affected regions that Coalition sensors had dismissed as background radiation. When properly filtered, they revealed desperate attempts at communication from the isolated civilizations. "They're still out there," Chen said softly. "All of them. Not destroyed, just cut off. Trying to reach us any way they can, but we've been too advanced to hear them." Captain Zwextel's crystalline form pulsed with determination. "How do we stop it?" Chen smiled grimly. "We go primitive. The shadow can bend quantum fields, disrupt subspace communications, even manipulate dark energy. But it can't stop a radio wave. It can't bend light. Sometimes the old ways are the best ways." "You want us to abandon our quantum communications?" Vilara asked, horrified. "Revert to antiquated technology?" "No," Chen replied. "I want us to remember that technology isn't always the answer. The most advanced predator can still be defeated by simple prey if that prey understands what's hunting it." She brought up a new simulation, showing how the shadow's pattern would spread. "We have 72 hours before it reaches the Coalition's core worlds. Time enough to prepare, if we're willing to learn from the past." The gathered scientists and officials looked at the human with new understanding. They had dismissed humanity as primitive, but perhaps that primitive perspective was exactly what they needed. "Tell us what you need," Captain Zwextel said, his tone carrying the weight of command. Chen's eyes gleamed with determination. "First, we need to get a message to those isolated civilizations, let them know help is coming. And for that, we're going to need the biggest radio transmitter ever built." The Coalition members watched as she began outlining her plan. They had prided themselves on moving beyond primitive technology, beyond the need for such basic tools. Now their survival might depend on remembering how to use them. The silent threat had forced the most advanced civilizations in the galaxy to realize that sometimes, the old ways were the best ways. And humanity, the primitives they had looked down upon, might be their only hope of survival. Understanding through chaos. Deep in the retrofitted cargo bay of the Eternal Light, Dr. Sarah Chen supervised the construction of what the Coalition engineers had dubbed the galaxy's biggest radio. The massive array of improvised transmitters and receivers filled the space with a web of cables and antennae that would have looked more at home in Earth's 20th century than aboard the Coalition's most advanced vessel. "It's ugly," admitted Lieutenant Kara Zhang, Chen's newly arrived assistant from Earth. "But it works." "Beauty is secondary to function," replied Clara, who had surprised everyone by volunteering to join Chen's team. The Verdant Nexus ambassador's bioluminescent patterns pulsed with what humans had learned to recognize as excitement. The first test transmission reached the Hraxian systems. "They heard us." Chen nodded, studying the incoming data. The response had been crude by Coalition standards, simple binary code transmitted via modulated radio waves, but it carried crucial information. The Hraxians were alive, adapting, and most importantly, they had discovered something about their isolators. "Look at this," Chen said, pointing to a particular sequence in the transmission. "They've been studying the shadow from inside. The quantum isolation isn't perfect, there are fluctuations, patterns. Like a heartbeat," Zhang observed, leaning closer to the display. "Exactly like a heartbeat," Chen confirmed, her eyes widening with sudden understanding. "It's not just a field or a weapon, it's alive. The shadow is a living entity." The revelation spread through the ship like wildfire. Coalition scientists, who had been searching for technological explanations, were forced to consider a biological one. The shadow wasn't a weapon deployed by some hostile force, it was the force itself, a predator that had evolved to hunt advanced civilizations. But how could such a creature evolve? Clara asked, her patterns showing skepticism. The energy requirements alone. The same way deep-sea creatures evolved on Earth to survive in extreme conditions, Chen explained. This entity feeds on quantum energy. The more advanced a civilization, the more attractive it is as prey. It's not malicious, it's just hungry. The concept was both terrifying and oddly reassuring. A biological entity, even one that lived in quantum fields, would follow certain universal principles. It would have limitations, vulnerabilities, and most importantly, it could be understood. That's why it hasn't attacked Earth or other less advanced worlds, Jean realized. We're not worth the energy expenditure. We're like plankton compared to the whales it usually hunts. Chen smiled at the analogy. And like whales, it has to surface to feed. Those fluctuations the Hraxians detected, they're moments when the creature has to stabilize its quantum field, like a whale breaching for air. Clara's patterns shifted to what humans had learned was her calculating configuration. If we can predict these fluctuations, we can attack during its vulnerable moments, Chen finished. But we need more data. We need to establish communication with other isolated systems, create a network of observers who can track these breaching events. The next few days saw a flurry of activity as more makeshift radio arrays were constructed and deployed throughout Coalition space. The response was overwhelming. Dozens of advanced civilizations, forced back to basics, had been gathering exactly the kind of data they needed. A pattern emerged. The shadow entity fed in cycles, creating predictable windows of vulnerability. But striking at these moments would require perfect timing and coordination, using only primitive technology that the creature couldn't detect or disrupt. It's like coordinating a galaxy-wide game of Marco Polo, Zhang joked during one planning session, then had to explain the children's swimming pool game to bemused coalition members. But the analogy stuck. Like blindfolded swimmers calling out to each other, the various civilizations would have to coordinate their actions using only sound and timing, working together despite their isolation. Chen stood before the Coalition Emergency Council, now expanded to include representatives from Earth. We have a plan, she announced. But it will require every coalition world to do something they haven't done in centuries, trust in simple solutions to solve a complex problem. She outlined the strategy. During the Shadow's next feeding cycle, when its quantum field would be most vulnerable, every affected civilization would simultaneously broadcast an overwhelming burst of electromagnetic energy, everything from radio waves to visible light to X-rays. The Shadow, evolved to hunt quantum energy, would be overwhelmed by this primitive but massive attack. Like triggering a gag reflex, Chen explained. Force it to expel its quantum field, and the isolated civilizations will be free. And if it doesn't work, asked one council member. Then we try something else, Chen replied simply. That's what humans do. We keep trying until we find what works. The council chamber was silent for a moment. Then, one by one, the representatives nodded. They had come to understand something about humanity. Their strength lay not in their technology or their intelligence, but in their relentless determination to find solutions, no matter how unconventional. As the preparations began, Chen couldn't help but smile at the irony. The most advanced civilizations in the galaxy were about to be saved by technology they had considered obsolete, coordinated by a species they had dismissed as primitive, all because humans had never forgotten the importance of looking backward to move forward. The Shadow had evolved to hunt the most advanced prey in the galaxy. But it had never encountered a species that could think both forward and backward at the same time. It was about to learn why humans had survived countless challenges on their own world, because sometimes, the best way to advance is to remember where you came from. The power of adaptation. The countdown had begun. Aboard the Eternal Light, Dr. Sarah Chen watched as status indicators from across the galaxy blinked green one by one. Each light represented a civilization preparing to fight back, not with quantum weapons or advanced technology, but with the most basic forms of energy they could generate. Status report from Earth, Lieutenant Zhang announced, her voice tight with anticipation. All major radio telescopes and broadcasting stations are ready. They've even reactivated some decommissioned equipment for extra power. Clara, who had become an unexpected bridge between human and coalition thinking, studied the tactical display with her bioluminescent patterns shifting rapidly. The Hraxians report their solar collectors are positioned. The Meridian cluster has converted their quantum reactors to produce electromagnetic radiation. Even the Mindweave collective has found ways to generate simple energy waves. Chen nodded, making final adjustments to their timing calculations. The shadow entity had maintained its feeding pattern, becoming more predictable as they tracked its movements. Now they understood its rhythm, the quantum equivalent of breath and heartbeat, of hunting and feeding. Remember, Chen addressed the gathered representatives from various species, timing is everything. We'll only have a narrow window when the entity's quantum field is at its weakest. Miss it, and we'll have to wait for another cycle, assuming it doesn't adapt to prevent future attempts. The plan was audacious in its simplicity. When the shadow's quantum field thinned during feeding, every affected civilization would simultaneously blast the surrounding space with electromagnetic radiation across all frequencies. The shadow, evolved to manipulate and feed on quantum energy, would be overwhelmed by this primitive but massive energy surge. Like throwing sand into a complex machine, Chen had explained during the planning sessions. Sometimes the simplest approaches are the most effective. The coalition members had been skeptical at first, but desperation and Chen's track record had won them over. Now they watched and waited, their most advanced sensors focused on the shadow's movements. 10 minutes to synchronization, Zhang announced. The tension in the command center was palpable. Chen's eyes were fixed on the display showing the shadow's quantum field fluctuations. Look at this, she said suddenly, pointing to a subtle change in the pattern. It's different. Clara moved closer, her patterns showing concern. Different how? The rhythm has changed. It's like. Chen's eyes widened. It knows. Somehow it knows we're planning something. The revelation sent a wave of panic through the command center. If the entity had detected their preparations, their one chance at coordinated action might be lost. But Chen was already thinking, her mind racing through possibilities. This was why humans had survived on Earth, not because they were the strongest or fastest, but because they could adapt faster than any predator. New plan, she announced, her voice cutting through the rising chaos. We don't wait for its feeding cycle. We force it to feed now. How? Clara demanded. Chen smiled grimly. We give it what it wants, the biggest quantum energy signature it's ever seen. Lieutenant Zhang, send the word to all coalition quantum facilities. Tell them to power up to maximum capacity, all at once. Make us look like the most tempting meal in the galaxy. Understanding dawned on Clara's face, her patterns shifting to match Chen's excitement. The entity won't be able to resist such a concentration of quantum energy. Exactly. And when it moves to feed. Chen turned to the communication station. All electromagnetic weapons stay ready. The exact moment, it engages its quantum field to feed, everyone fires. Not on my signal, but on the entity's own movement. It was a desperate gambit, changing their carefully coordinated plan at the last minute. But that was another human trait the coalition was learning to value, the ability to improvise, to turn apparent failure into unexpected opportunity. The next few minutes were tense as the orders spread across coalition space. Every quantum facility that could still operate powered up to maximum capacity, creating an irresistible lure for the shadow entity. Movement detected, Zhang reported, her voice steady despite the pressure. The shadow is changing course, heading directly for the quantum energy concentration. Chen watched the tactical display, her heart pounding. Everything depended on timing now, not the artificial timing they had planned, but the natural rhythm of predator and prey. Energy spike. Zhang called out. The entity is engaging its quantum field. Now. Chen commanded, and across the galaxy, civilizations responded. Simple electromagnetic energy, radio waves, light, X-rays, and everything in between, burst forth from countless sources. The shadow entity, its quantum field extended to feed, was suddenly bombarded by energy it had evolved to ignore. The effect was immediate and dramatic. The entity's quantum field began to destabilize, its carefully maintained patterns disrupted by the flood of primitive energy. Like a squid releasing ink, it expelled its quantum field in a massive burst, freeing all the civilizations it had trapped. As quantum communications were restored across coalition space, cheers erupted in the command center. They had done it, defeated an advanced threat with the most basic tools at their disposal. But Chen wasn't celebrating yet. She watched the tactical display, tracking the shadow entity's movements. It's retreating, she announced. But it's learned from this encounter. It won't hunt the same way again. Clara's patterns showed both relief and concern. Then we must learn as well. Perhaps. She hesitated, then continued, perhaps it's time for the coalition to remember that advancing doesn't always mean abandoning the past. Chen nodded, understanding the deeper meaning in the ambassador's words. The coalition had learned a valuable lesson. True advancement meant building upon the past, not replacing it entirely. And humanity, with its mix of innovation and remembered wisdom, would have an important role to play in that future. The shadow entity had changed how it hunted. Now the galaxy would have to change how it defended itself. And that process of adaptation, of learning and growing while remembering where you came from, was perhaps humanity's greatest gift to the coalition. Respect earned. One standard year after the Shadow Entity incident, the Grand Assembly Hall of the Galactic Coalition looked very different. The quantum-based displays now shared space with simpler electromagnetic screens. Advanced neural interfaces coexisted with basic tactile controls. And at the central podium, where High Ambassador Clara once dismissed humanity's primitive technology, Dr. Sarah Chen addressed the gathered representatives of the galaxy's most powerful civilizations. The shadow entity's attack taught us something profound, Chen said, her voice carrying across the chamber. Advanced doesn't always mean better. Complex doesn't always mean superior. True evolution isn't about leaving everything behind, it's about building upon what works. The assembled representatives nodded in agreement. The past year had seen dramatic changes in how the coalition approached technology and defense. Every major civilization now maintained what they called backup basics, conventional communication systems and energy generation methods that could function independently of quantum technology. We've tracked the shadow entity's movements through deep space, Chen continued, bringing up a combined display of quantum and electromagnetic scanning data. It's still out there, still hunting, but it's learned to avoid coalition space. More importantly, we've learned to detect others of its kind. This revelation caused a stir in the chamber. The discovery that the shadow entity wasn't unique had initially caused panic, but humanity's approach to understanding and dealing with these cosmic predators had transformed fear into cautious confidence. Today, I'm not here to discuss threats, Chen said, her expression softening. I'm here to propose something new. The coalition has traditionally focused on advancing technology, on moving forward. But humanity's gift to the galaxy isn't our ability to advance, it's our ability to remember. She gestured to the hybrid systems around them. We remember our past struggles and solutions. We remember what it's like to be vulnerable, to be primitive, to face challenges without advanced technology. And most importantly, we remember how to adapt. Clara moved forward, her bioluminescent patterns displaying what humans now recognized as profound respect. The Coalition Council has considered Dr. Chen's proposal. We agree that the time has come for a new approach to galactic civilization. The announcement that followed marked a fundamental shift in Coalition philosophy. The establishment of the Galactic Heritage Institute, led jointly by humans and Coalition species, would ensure that no useful knowledge or technology would ever be completely abandoned in the rush for advancement. But the real change was deeper than any single institution. The Coalition had learned to value humanity not for their technology or their military might, but for their perspective, their unique blend of innovation and remembrance, of moving forward while knowing when to look back. As the session concluded, Chen found herself in the chamber's observation dome, looking out at the stars. Lieutenant Zhang joined her, carrying 2 cups of very non-regulation earth coffee. "Quite a change from when you first stood in this chamber," Zhang observed, handing Chen a cup. Chen smiled, remembering the dismissive whispers and doubtful glances. "They needed us," she said simply. "Not for our technology or our weapons, but for our memory. Our stubborn refusal to forget what got us here. And our equally stubborn determination to keep moving forward," Zhang added with a grin. Clara approached, her patterns showing amusement. "Speaking of moving forward, the Council has approved the expansion of the Earth-based training program. More Coalition species want to learn what you call basic survival skills." Chen laughed. Teaching advanced alien species how to make fire, use radio waves, and understand simple mechanics had become unexpectedly popular. Who would have thought that going backward would be the key to moving forward? "Not backward," Clara corrected, her patterns shifting to show deeper understanding. "The Coalition now understands that true advancement isn't linear. It's about building layers of knowledge, understanding, and capability. Humanity doesn't just remember the past, you learn from it." As they stood there, watching ships of all types, from quantum drives to fusion engines, move through Coalition space, Chen reflected on how far they'd come. The galaxy had learned to respect humans not because they were the strongest or most advanced, but because they were the most complete. They carried their past with them, using it to light the way forward. The shadow entity had meant to prey on advanced civilizations. Instead, it had taught the galaxy a valuable lesson: true strength lies not in abandoning the past for the future, but in bringing them together. And humanity, with its unique blend of memory and ambition, would help lead the way into this new era of galactic civilization. In the end, respect wasn't given or taken, it was earned through understanding, adaptation, and the wisdom to know that sometimes, the best way to face the future is to remember where you came from.